Welcome to Merschman Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, we had a productive week sending out product guides and learning lots of information from Corteva. Our policy is no substitutions or its free guarantee on Merschman Hybrids when it comes to getting what you ordered. Dylan has a yield update on our hyper early wheat lines. Ben is seeing nitrogen and sulfur deficiency in the field. Hear about management and setting expectations this late in the season.
Hi, this is Joe Merschman. Welcome to Merschman Seeds Cup of Joe. Today we have Ben, Lynn, and Dylan. And Ben, you're going to lead the discussion today.
Yep. So it's been a busy week, but it's been a really fun week and an informative week. We spent some time with some genetic suppliers on corn. We spent some time doing lots of field walking and looking at product. There's a lot to see this time of year when it comes to different corn hybrids out there and different soybeans and whatnot. So one of the meetings we went to, I just wanted to share some stats that came out of the Corteva camp. When it comes to Enlist, when we're talking soybeans, 90% of that market is controlled by the Enlist 1 herbicide. And the Enlist 1 herbicide is straight goods, 2,4-D, choline, and the other 10% comes from Enlist Duo, which is the glyphosate blended with Enlist 1, which makes a nice little tank mix option.
Yeah, and they also reported that 65% of the acres this spring were planted to Enlist E3 soybeans. So it is now the dominant trait in the industry.
Yep, and that number is actually higher if you count the I states. So if you count the I states and you isolate those compared to the rest of the soybean and corn belt, that number is probably in the 70 to 75% range for market share for the Enlist E3 soybeans. So I thought those were some interesting things that I jotted notes down on. From the marketing or the target marketing rate, which is something that we've talked about on Cup of Joe, they expect less than 20% of power core acres to be using the Enlist herbicide, which is what we have talked about, that we want guys to maintain that same program that they're using in their corn, but knowing they have extra options on the table, whether it be Liberty or 2,4-D, to come in and clean up messy weeds later on. That's a really invaluable tool, especially when we had springs like this year where weeds were harder to kill. So that's a huge advantage with the PowerCore Enlist corn program, but they just validated what we've been talking about, that we want guys to use good solid pre-programs. We want guys to be using Group 27s in their posts. We want guys to be multiple layers of residual in every aspect when it comes to their corn program.
Yeah, weeds are still a problem, no matter what system you have, and you got to attack it with a minimum of 2 modes of action.
Correct. One of the other things in this meeting that we were sitting in is this PowerCore trait, and us hooking ourselves to the Corteva bandwagon, you should say, potentially in corn here, because it's a new opportunity for independents to be accessing that kind of genetics. By 2028 to 2030, there will be lots of changes that are coming in that camp. And we've known about these for a little while, but we haven't really talked about them. But there's some really positive things. There's some genes that are coming in the marketplace that will add yield stability, and we're extremely excited about that. They're talking about not necessarily like the drought guard style of stuff that we've heard in the past, but there's genes that they're using for enhanced
phosphorus efficiency. We're looking at some potential there to have some natural defense from the plant regulated ethylene production. I mean, just some different, I don't want to call them modes of action, but different ways of yield preservation that's not in the common mindset when we look at fertility, chemistry, fungicide, just kind of some different ways of going for yield preservation.
And they're coming at it, I was looking for the word, but they're coming at it through gene editing. And they've isolated a set of genes, and they're moving them into the genome in that neighborhood, is the way they talked about it. So where they'd be able to actually isolate certain genes for yield that control, like what you were talking about, stress reduction, nutrient uptake, water uptake, all of those things. And it's a different exact mode of action for them to be able to call yield and yield stability a genomic trait that they're chasing. The other thing that they are chasing by that 2028 to 2030 timeframe is a enhanced disease protection from the same style of gene editing as what we were talking about from the yield side, and that will only be available in the PowerCore or Vorseed or whatever trait platform that comes with that time frame. So there's a lot of excitement in the corn world. I think Corteva has their foot on the gas as hard as anybody right now, and we're really, really excited with the germplasm we have now and being able to add on top what's coming down the pipeline. I think that we're sitting in a really, really strong spot, and if our listeners are loyal soybean customers, we really appreciate them, but you really need to look at some of this Merschman corn material.
Yeah, we didn't bring it because it's coming in second. I mean, it's going to be right at the top on your farm.
Yep.
I thought it was pretty interesting too in the conversation on why. I guess we're always into the why and the how, and on the why and the how too as well. When we look at this this program that we're working with. From our genetic supplier, the combinations of male to female that are coming out of this camp are pretty prolific in the sense that we're getting yield gain through some of those different combinations, and some of the competition what they're running into is that particularly one camp that a male is doing. A lot of the breeding side is coming from one male, so they're looking at potentially some stagnation as they're just running out of different combinations, because some of this is, when we look at genetics, some of it is a product of just math. If you can get a lot of different combinations and figure out what works, that's great, but as you start to, you take off one side of that Punnett square, you lower your mathematical formula there, and something that we were looking at in those plots when we were looking at the inbreds is just the amount of genetic diversity that they are breeding against or breeding with from a male and female side that is pretty prolific.
And also we learned that the production. We visited the production site where our corn is produced, and supplies are going to be good, and we're going to get yield estimates next week, and so that's one of the things that we do different than any other company is we have a guarantee. In other words, if you order a hybrid today and we do not deliver that hybrid, we're not talking about weight or grade, but we're just talking about the hybrid, the substitution is free. So it's a no substitution or it's free guarantee, and we can tell you right now, we feel real good about our supply. We feel good that we're going to have plenty of seed and no substitutions. So that's an advantage of dealing with Merschman seeds.
And the quality last year, it was second to none. And I think they set such a high bar on saturated colds last year with the quality they had. They had a phenomenal crop, a phenomenal growing season last year. I think this year could even be slightly better. I mean, when we had our saturated cold germs coming in the mid-90s, and to expect that again this year, it's just unbelievable. The quality that's coming out of our production facility that we hire out is absolutely unbelievable. And for us to try to do that ourselves, wouldn't be able to handle it.
It's a company that specializes just in production. They own all their own land, so all of their production is grown on their land and comes into their plant. They control it from the beginning, from the planting to the spraying to the harvesting, detasseling, the whole thing, and their philosophies align with us in that high quality, and this is one of the secrets to high yields in corn is uniform emergence. If you can get that high germination, high quality, that's the first step to high yields, getting the corn out of the ground as uniform as possible. So, and then of course with the seed treatment that you've put on our corn bin, it makes it just incredibly better. So we're doing some things different than some of the other companies out there, and consequently this is going to show up in the combine hopper this fall. And I think as you ask farmers that have planted the new Merschman PowerCore corn, I think you're going to see a lot of satisfied customers this year.
Absolutely. Dylan, what do we got rolling on today?
Yeah, so as we've been kind of traveling around and different calls have been coming in, we kind of wanted to hammer home our wheat yields with our hyper earlies and our ultra earlies. We've gotten quite a few calls, and then again yesterday at field days, they want to know what this hyper early wheat is about and what if it is truly yielding, and we have those numbers to back it up. So like our local acres, we had a limited kind of launch with our new hyper earlies, but it's something to really look forward to. This summer when we took it off, and this was planted in 15-inch rows like we've kind of mentioned before, and that's really something that was really a wow factor when it came to yield, and even like our weed control was phenomenal too. So this is very high.
So Dylan, you just used our normal 15-inch row soybean planter and got a special plate for it?
Yep, wheat plates, and we were off to the races with the John Deere planter, and it really took off. So with our Genie, it was on kind of the toughest ground that we had this variety on, and it ended up doing 97, which is very, very phenomenal, or amazing. And then our KD16 was on 52 acres, and it did 83, and it has a big old sand knob right in the middle of it. So that was really impressive. And then the Peyton 2 did 104 on 26 acres, and I think that's the one that I'm most excited about to see grow and see what it really has in store for us.
I think product manager, someone might have made a decision for you. Huh?
Yeah, he might have.
I like that one. And then, so it's really something to look forward to as we're talking and we're driving around on the countryside. We can really boost guys' confidences that may have a little question about it with it being early.
Well, that Peyton, if I remember, really big seed, right? And then also it's what I call a blonde. In other words, it has that golden brown appearance that harvest is absolutely stunning. I mean, as far as, it's one of them wheats that look so good you almost hate to cut it, right?
That's right. And then in Iowa State, they did some testing for us too, and those yields came back really well too. The Genie did 105 through 4 replicated trials. Peyton did 100 on the dot, and Katie did 90. So those are more great yields that are coming with these hyper early options.
That was done at Crawfordsville, Iowa, which is southeast Iowa, and it's on prairie soils, correct? So basically, what you increased on the land around our Fort Madison plant is more of a sandy loam, and that's just the opposite. So.
Yeah, very high yields. And one of the reasons that Crawfordsville was doing that for us is we're involved in their relay cropping program as well. So they are working to do the economics, to investigate the economics behind wheat by itself, soybeans by themselves, wheat, soybean double crop, and then wheat, soybean intercrop or relay cropping. So while they were doing that, I'm like, hey, why don't you test some ultra hyper earlies for us for yield too? So
yeah, if you're considering doing this relay cropping, if you're not familiar with what we're saying, what it is you'd use your 15-inch row planter and plant, and then the key thing is if you're planning to relay crop, you don't plant at 1.5 million seeds per acre. You plant about 800,000, right, Ben?
Yep.
800,000, so that's about half rate in 15-inch rows. And then the first opportunity that you have, you want to plant the soybeans, which would be in April if you could, between the rows in April. And you want a variety like Millie 8 because it's taller, because those beans are going to be growing right underneath that canopy. So you want the taller wheats, and you want an ultra early or hyper early because you want to get that wheat off as soon as you can so that soybean plant can come through there. The other suggestion that we got was you want to plant your rows east and west so that you can get sunlight from the morning to night, so you don't, because soybeans, if they don't have enough light, they kind of turn into like a pea vine. They just start sending up little things, and you don't get a real good structure. Also, when you're picking your soybean variety, pick a short, squatty one, right, Ben? Kennedy is a good one. Yep. In other words, something that goes sideways more so than upward, and that's a plus. Is there anything other?
Harvest at an angle, and if you can get skinny duals back, a lot of guys have gone to floats because the combines get so big. They want big floater tires and big duals, but if you have a combine that's out there that's still on row crop duals, and you want to harvest at an angle, so you don't want that consistent row being knocked down. You want something at an angle where the plants can compensate and weeds don't become an issue.
So your wheat yield will still be very respectable, but your soybean yield jumps way up.
Yep.
And that's what you can expect. So I know there's going to be some farmers out there that want to try this, and we'd be glad to work with them on it. There's a little bit of art to it yet. It's not quite down to science, but we're talking to the experts, and they're giving us the advice. And we're the Iowa Soybean Association is looking for folks that would be willing to share their results or work with them to get some type of so we can pass this along to other farmers. But if you've got soil types that are more on the marginal side, this could be a real winner for you. And then you don't have that big push or rush to get that wheat off too, like you do when you want a double crop after wheat, and then you also have much more moisture in the spring. So something to think about, relay cropping. And
you're going to be hearing more out of us. I don't have it planned on where we're going to do it yet, but I think we're going to have at least 40 acres of this next year that we get to follow along with.
And we've even heard that they've done relay cropping in 30-inch rows too, haven't we?
Yep.
So
and that's where your yield will be pulled back on your wheat if you're trying to split 15s. So a 30-inch bean crop and a 30-inch wheat crop. But I think it can be done. I think it can be managed. Past couple of years, we mentioned this last week, but the past couple of years have been very, very dry. It's been hard to make this work. Years like this year where guys have stuck it out, I think it's going to be a home run.
But the most interesting thing I heard about the relay cropping was, plant as early as you can get it in. And that kind of fits most farmers' idea about planting beans anyhow.
Right.
I think too, just another caveat from the management side, if you can get as big of a bean head as you can, or wheat head, so that way you're minimizing your passes along there, would definitely help. And if it's all possible to get below that V3 time frame with beans, that you can knock them over. They're still in that alfalfa phase that they'll pop back up. And the coolest part too about in those situations where we've seen guys do it with like triticale, they come in and chop, is when they come back in to do that double crop, that first node set is probably 3 to 4 inches off the ground. So when they get up on their bean side, they don't have to run that draper head clear on the ground and run the risk of, I'm not saying maybe finding a rock or hedge post that's come out of the creek that's flooded or anything like that. So there's some management side too there that is pretty handy. And as we run into some issues locally here around Septoria, pulling that first node up off the ground and not running into that splash zone, it can be pretty fruitful and keeping that bean pretty healthy as well.
So Lynn's buying everybody 40-foot draper heads. Get your name on the list.
Nothing bigger?
Well, I think they got a 60-footer.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm sure they do.
Yeah.
Big
I think
draper
maybe you
head.
might run into some issues there on your weight, your weight running across the field, trying to keep that sucker up off the ground on the
1420 with a 60-foot draper head.
Yeah.
It'll all work out good.
There you go, Dylan.
Dylan, you may have to put some weights on the back of our combine.
No, that's all good. I wanted to talk just a little bit too about corn and the nitrogen deficiency that we're kind of seeing right now. It's nothing that is extremely detrimental to the yield that we're seeing, but and it's all over. It's eastern Illinois to western Iowa. We had kernels that pollinated at the tip of the ear, and we're seeing those pull back. And the fields that I'm seeing those pull back in the most are firing from the bottom. So it's just a nitrogen, well, in my opinion, there's no science, and I haven't done tissue tests, but in my opinion, what we're seeing there is we're seeing a reallocation of nitrogen and sulfur away from those kernel tips as they're filling in to the rest of the kernel during, post-dent or post-dough stage as they're trying to build test weight in. So nitrogen, this is just something to be looking for next year, but our corn plants, in my opinion, ran just a little shy on the nitrogen that they needed to enhance yield. And I think that there's a handful of fields that left 15 to 25 bushel an acre, because if you do the math on what an 18 by 35 versus an 18 by 40 would do on 32,000 or 34,000, if you just do the math that direction, and then if you want to be conservative, cut that number in half, that's the yield that's left on the table, and that's the yield that I almost guarantee that the extra nitrogen would have paid for. So that's one of those.
You got spots in your field this year that are going to yield 300 on the best ground.
Yep.
And so did you fertilize for 300? Probably not. Farmers don't fertilize that heavy, but the reality of it is to average like 200 or 220 or whatever the number is, you got to have some spots really, really good to offset the spots that are not so good. Right. So that's why fertility, is not, if you had a perfectly uniform field, yeah, it's easy to do, but most fields aren't uniform. You got to get those highs to get higher, and that takes a little more nitrogen.
Yep. No, I just wanted to note that because I've seen that in certain fields, and guys we've had a lot of conversations about how splitting nitrogen and later applications of nitrogen and tissue tests and soil tests are all part of the decision, and it's not like a crop that you just get a plant, put your fertilizer on ahead of time and worry about harvesting it in the fall. If you're really trying to get the most bang for your buck, nitrogen is something that you manage even this late in the season or right prior to tassel.
Correct. And I would say this year, what would be the biggest differentiating factor as far as we're going to have just as high yields, to Joe's point, as we had last year. Last year, we were really consistent across that, but when we look at that, we didn't run into those nitrogen issues as early as we've had. So part of that, I think, has to do with we just had so much rainfall early that our bank emptied out, where last year we didn't necessarily have as much. We had rainfall early. We had just enough kind of timely rains to get through. Now this year we're probably still trending 6 to 7 inches above normal here in comparison. So I do look for that to probably mean that we're going to have a really mild winter or a dry fall, which isn't the end of the world. But when we're setting expectations based off of last year, when we think that we had pretty good moisture, which we did. I don't think we're as timely as we were in relation to last year. I think we're going to have some crops that will be very respectable, but I don't know if you can go out and expect your marginal ground to be 230, 240 bushel like it was previous. I think there was a lot of water stress that is going on in this crop that certain hybrids are definitely showing some stress. Certain ground is showing some stress, but there is some pretty phenomenal looking corn out there as well, though.
Well, we've been relatively cool, and so that favors corn development, because the longer you can take from pollination to black layer, the longer the period, that means longer field period, deeper kernels. But on the other flip side of it, soybeans like heat, and we're just not getting as much heat. So is it, the question is, are we going to see really, really good corn yields and maybe soybean yields still good but not super? I don't know. But soybeans respond to heat. So usually when you get a lot of extra heat towards the end of summer, that favors soybeans and shortens that fill time on corn and affects corn yield. So that's just my 2 cents from as far as general statements about what kind of yields can we expect. Right now, the weather's favoring corn, in my opinion.
Yeah, these youngsters at two-a-days are they're just not having the dog days of summers like we did back in my day, right, Dylan? So it's also good, like I said, good weather for all the football players going back and all the fall sports, because it's pretty mild in comparison.
Yep, and one question that I wanted to bring up, Lynn, what is the difference between a corn crop that is green to the very top and a corn crop that is starting to show up yellow at the top of the corn plant? So
we're seeing that on our struggling acres personally, where we're running into some flooding. Sulfur is probably non-existent, and I'll be honest with you, in that particular farm, sulfur is one that needs to be spoon-fed, just because of how the water comes off of all the fields around it, how the water sometimes in relation to this year comes up and out of the creek and floods the ground. With sulfur being extremely mobile, just like nitrogen, we probably started off with a deficit. I'll just be honest. We should have had more sulfur into the mix, and it's becoming very evident in those acres, because what we're seeing yellow from the top and yellow from the bottom. And I would expect that one particular, it's like 9 acres, but that one we're seeing some brown husk on it as well. So that crop gave everything it had to that. The ears look respectable, but it is something from a management standpoint that will be addressed next year. We'll potentially look at split applied nitrogen and including sulfur in that. And our conversations with Harry, he's going even beyond what some of the university recommendations for sulfur is, and talking with Henry as well, that we're into some guys into the 40-pound sulfur applications, and not really seeing the law of diminishing returns come in. So that is something from a management standpoint. You see that yellowing up top. Probably 90% of it would be sulfur deficiency.
There's some anthracnose top dieback. I haven't seen near as much of that, but I just wanted to, if you're driving by fields and you're wondering why this corn crop on the right-hand side has yellow tops, it's because sulfur is an immobile nutrient. So once you're out of nutrients with an immobile nutrient,
immobile in the crop.
yes, it's immobile in the crop, but mobile in the soil. When a nutrient is deficient and it's immobile, it will show up at the top of the plant or the newest growing points of that plant. And when like nitrogen or potassium are mobile, they're not immobile in the plant, they show deficiency from the bottom side because they're robbing from those leaves, pulling it up. So if you're wondering why the corn crop on the right-hand side of the road is yellowing from the top and it looks like it's going through like an early senescence period, my guess there is that it's a sulfur deficiency. So something to be looking for next year's corn crop and trying to manage through all the variables for next year.
Very true.
So covered a lot of stuff. Busy week.
Yeah, it was a busy week and it was a fun week. So, well, that brings us to the corny jokes, okay? I got so many to pick from. I mean,
does that mean they're good?
Yeah, well, I won't guarantee they're good, but I got a lot to pick from. Okay, I want to tell you a little fact. You know, I thought the dryer was shrinking my clothes. You know, you've heard that, you know. Turns out it was my refrigerator all along. Okay? All right. I got one here about a bar, and we've always had good luck with bar jokes here. And so a guy walks into the bar and asks for 10 shots of the establishment's finest single malt scotch. The bartender sets them up all in a row and pours them out. The guy takes the first one, dumps it out. Takes the last one, dumps it out. And the bartender says, "What are you doing?" And the guy replies, "Well, the first shot always tastes like crap, and the last shot always makes me sick." Okay? All right. Now this one here, this is a good one, but I'm going to get in trouble for it, okay?
Uh-oh.
I'm going to get in trouble, okay? I don't know if you knew this. Sometimes I wake up grumpy, but other times I just let her sleep.
I'm going to have to use that one. I like that one.
Anyhow.
We'll find out if Barb watches Cup of Joe.
Yeah, well, she doesn't watch Cup of Joe, my wife, Barb, but my friends do. Now, don't be telling her, okay? Okay, anyhow. Thanks for watching today. We sincerely appreciate your business. We hope that you're getting ready for harvest and we have a bountiful, safe harvest, and we'll see you next week. Take care.